Good evening. On behalf of the BYU Gerentology program, I welcome you to the 25th Annual Russell B. Clark BYU Gerentology Conference. Throughout his life, Dr. Clark defined what successful aging really is. His zest for living and his competitive spirit was truly remarkable. I remember comments he made after a race at the Huntsman Senior Games. He came back and he was talking with us and he commented that he was really worried that he was going to be beat by a 97-year-old. And he commented to us, he said, that wouldn't look good to be beat by a young guy. You just have to keep things in perspective when you talk about aging. The remarkable thing is he still holds the record down at the Huntsman Senior Games for the 50-meter and 200-meter events for his age group. I think he was a lot like President Hinckley when he came up and said, I have no peers. And but Dr. Clark was just remarkable. You can read on the back of your program about his many accomplishments. And I just hope you look at his life as an example of what successful aging really is. We honor his legacy tonight. The BYU Gerentology program was established over 36 years ago. We currently have over 300 students in our minor and certificate programs. Our mission is to educate students about the aging process, to enhance preparation for careers in aging, and to promote quality interdisciplinary research on the many health and social issues facing older people. Tonight we have the opportunity to learn about some of the latest issues and research in the field of aging. I greatly appreciate Roy Christensen coming to BYU to provide our keynote address tonight. Roy and Carol Christensen are great friends of BYU and work hard to meet the needs of older people. His immense experience in the nursing home industry is greatly needed today to deal with the current aging tsunami that is hitting the U.S. and the world, and I'm sure he'll speak to that issue a little. We have Dr. Loretta DiPierato from George Washington University, who will address the role of exercise in successful aging, and Dr. Ryan Watts will introduce us to his latest research on Alzheimer's disease and its impact on the aging brain. I sincerely thank all our speakers for visiting BYU and participating in our conference this evening and tomorrow. The conference will proceed now as outlined in your program. Amy Hullinger, a Gerentology scholarship recipient, will offer the invocation and we'll proceed from there.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this beautiful day and for the opportunity to gather together tonight to learn and to better understand this period of life. And we are grateful for those who have come to speak to us and for all the hard work and dedication that has gone into the research that will be presented tonight. And we pray that our minds will be open, that we may be able to understand the messages as they're presented. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Good evening. I'm Ben Ogles, Dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences. On behalf of the administration, President Worthen and Vice President Webb, and the two other deans that oversee the Gerentology program, Dean Patty Ravert and Rod Brown from Life Sciences and Nursing, I welcome you all to the opening session of our conference today. Especially welcome our guests who are here to speak to us. We're grateful to have the Gerentology program. Hope you take some time after the talks to look at the posters that are out in the hallway that represent work done by our excellent faculty along with a number of students. You'll find that BYU is a great place for students to be mentored in these kinds of projects. So welcome. It's my pleasure to represent the administration and having you all here. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to ask Lorilla Hawkins, better known as Rilla to everyone she has dealt with, to come up, please, to the stand. Why don't you come over here? For many years, Rilla has worked with local community groups and government organizations to actively promote programs for older people. Each October, Rilla has taken about 30 or more health science students down to St. George to conduct a health assessment at the Huntsman World Senior Games. That has proved to be quite an experience every year for these students and for Rilla. Her dedication to providing our students invaluable training experience and opportunities to see healthy seniors from all over the world competing in athletic competitions will be greatly missed this coming October. She's been going down for many years and helping us with that health assessment, and I really appreciate that. Since 2007, she's made a major contribution to BYU students and to our Gerentology program by teaching classes and supervising internships in the health science department. For the last several years, she has taught health and aging process class and supervised gerontology internships for hundreds of health science students. On a personal note, over the years, Rilla has been just an absolutely delightful person to work with. But unfortunately, she's doing something called retirement, which she did in December, and is moving on to other adventures in life. So what I'd like to do is present this plaque of distinguished service in gerontology to Rilla Hawkins with a great deal of gratitude and thanks for all the work that you've done for our students and for this university.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
It's my pleasure to introduce the first of the research speakers here at this Gerentology conference. That's Loretta DiPietro. She's currently the chair of the Department of Exercise Science within the School of Public Health at George Washington University. She began her illustrious career as an undergraduate at Southern Connecticut State University, where she was an outstanding field hockey player. So good that she's now in the Hall of Fame for Connecticut. It's pretty good. Okay. She's really she also likes lacrosse, and you could tell because she's really athletic is that she married a rugby coach. Anyway, she went on to get an MPH at Yale University School of, it's the Department of Epidemiology and Public Health, and a PhD in epidemiology there. Spent some time at a postdoc at Yale for a couple years. When we couldn't get enough money to keep her there, she went off to Philadelphia to work for a year with an expert in obesity and overeating disorders at the University of Pennsylvania's medical school. Then she came back when we finally got enough money to keep her. And she worked at the Yale and John B. Pierce Laboratory for several years, and then decided she was going to go down to the CDC for a while because she wanted to wear a uniform. And then she came back and she stayed there until 2008, where she did move to George Washington University. Her research interests are about physical activity in older individuals and their impact on health and disease, especially focused on some glucose regulation. She's published widely meaning that she publishes in journals as far off as the Journal of Applied Physiology, the American Journal of Public Health, and JAMA. So she's got the whole picture under control, I guess, because she's got the physiology, the epidemiology, and the clinical aspect. She's also a permanent member of the National Institutes of Aging study section on aging and geriatrics. So she's a big deal. So no, she doesn't need any more further introduction. So here she is, Laura DiPietro.
Well, I want to thank you all for inviting me here to Provo and to Brigham Young University. Gary Mack and I go way back to when we were graduate students, and I really feel sorry for you graduate students who have him. On the other hand, he knows more than any other human being about his job, and so he was an excellent partner and mentor for me, colleague in crime, and it's wonderful to see him again. So, oops, okay, wait, Gary. This is a Mac, not a Gary Mac. Okay. Now what? Oh, it's up there. Okay, sorry. Okay, so as I was instructed, tonight I'm giving just a really condensed version of research in successful aging and the role of exercise, and tomorrow I'll get more into the nitty-gritty. But I wanted to paint a picture tonight of how important exercise is across the lifespan. And as Gary mentioned, I do study successful aging, and in my mind, successful aging starts in utero. Okay, and it is the product of a lifetime of being physically active. So anyone in gerontology or in aging field understands now the demographics of aging. We have a population that is growing older and older, primarily due to advancements in public health and in medical care. Decreased mortality has people living longer and longer into older age. So look at the projections of, at least in the United States, of our population of people age 65 and older. And I want to point out the fastest growing subpopulation of older adults is in people age 85 and older. And you're all aware that people over age 65, most have at least one chronic condition, and people over age 85, most have 3 or more chronic conditions. So this is a real public health issue as well as an economic and political issue. So when I talk about successful aging, these are the clinical indicators that define it. And you'll notice it's just going down the list. Some indicators have to do with illnesses, for example, being hospitalized or being in bed. But then other indicators are self-reported and have to do with activities of daily living or instrumental activities of daily living that really provide information on how functional are you. I also want to point out that there are indicators other than just physical function or lack of illness. You can see there is a clinical depression scale that becomes very important. And I've highlighted in pink some very, very important indicators that are becoming more and more relevant. Life satisfaction, life view score, and self-rated health. These indicators have very, very strong relationship with longevity in older people. So it's no secret to anyone that exercise is good. Okay, everybody knows that. And so where we're at now, particularly with aging, is to really recommend this as a countermeasure for much of the functional decline that occurs as people get older. I was inspired as a graduate student by the work of Walter Bortz, who compared aging to similarities in aging and the loss of functional decline to what's observed with astronauts when they come back from long space flights, and similar to long periods of enforced bed rest. Okay, and the common element in those scenarios is microgravity or hypogravity. And I want you to think about the common lifestyle, the modern day lifestyle now, where most people, due to increased automation, the iPhone, everything, are sitting or reclining for 14 hours a day. Okay, in older people, that's even more. Right, so physical activity now becomes extremely important in older age because people have lost more functional reserve. And the idea is to use exercise to either improve or to maintain physical function. So we now know that exercise, there's enough evidence that exercise is beneficial for just about every chronic disease in older age, right? And it has a positive influence for every risk factor related to those chronic diseases. And what is it about exercise that's so good? Those of us studying physical activity and exercise, we talk about these 5 dimensions. The energy expenditure involved when we move, or the aerobic intensity of a given type of physical activity. We talk about the weight-bearing aspects of activity, the flexibility and the strength promoting aspects. So these 5 dimensions, they're not mutually exclusive, but their relative importance changes as depending on the group that you're studying. So whereas in younger people, where we worry about weight control, energy expenditure and aerobic capacity become the more important features to focus on in exercise programs. In older people, that's less so. What becomes more and more important as osteopenia takes hold and people are losing lean mass and strength, our programs tend to focus more on the weight-bearing and strength-producing aspects of physical activity. And so briefly, I'll just in a few slides and very generally discuss the relation of physical activity to the maintenance of 3 key health indicators in older age: physical function, lean mass, preservation of lean muscle mass, and its role in the maintenance of insulin sensitivity and glycemic control. So with regard to physical function, we tend to think in terms of building blocks. Down at the bottom of this chart, you have the basic components of physical function, and the building blocks involved, obviously, are strength, balance, coordination, flexibility, and endurance. And so these are factors that we work on in really helping older people maintain their ability to move about their house, their yard, their neighborhood, and to be involved in their community, right? But what we've learned over the last decade is, whereas these building blocks are necessary elements of building strength and balance, they in themselves are not sufficient to translate into these higher order functional abilities. And so we talk about activities of daily living, which comprise bathing, eating, walking, dressing. Well, having strength and balance, obviously coordination, is important to be able to perform those without assistance, but so is confidence. And so training programs now address this self-efficacy and building confidence in people that they can do this. Okay, as you move higher up the order to incidental activities of daily living, well, that involves cooking, shopping, housework, planning, and so cognitive function becomes another necessary element and part of training. And then finally, as people are able to carry out advanced activities of daily living, moving and volunteering in their neighborhood, their church, their community, social support becomes very important. So we've learned a lot over the last several decades of doing exercise studies in people, and the physical elements are necessary, but they're not sufficient. You must add to them some of the psychocognitive social elements that build confidence in older people. With regard to the preservation of lean mass, we've known for a very long time that exercise will improve this in even the most frail older populations. And we know that resistive exercise is better than aerobic exercise for doing that. But we also know that the combination of aerobic and resistive training is really what's best. Okay, there's a graded dose-response relationship between the amount that you do and the level of improvement that's observed. People have observed increases in cross-sectional area of individual fibers. That's no secret. Muscles get bigger, and since 1994, the first study performed on nursing home residents by Maria Fiatarone, we know we can improve strength in older people. They can adapt. Even these 90-year-olds can adapt. All right, but it's improving muscle quantity is one aspect. The other aspect we become involved in is the quality of the muscle, and this is especially so in older age where sarcopenia or muscle wasting becomes a primary concern. So in addition to muscle improving perhaps the quantity, what we've observed is far greater improvements in muscle quality. Okay, and these involve biochemical changes and hormonal changes, structural changes and adaptations, increased capillary fiber density, so the capillary to fiber ratio increases. We've noticed some improvements and shifts in fiber types. All this leading to improved muscle glucose extraction. So it's not just quantity of muscle, it's the quality. And so what I'm going to address tomorrow has to do a little bit with sarcopenia, but I'm also going to address the issue of multi-tissue insulin resistance. Most people who study diabetes and insulin resistance really concentrate only on the muscle, which is very, very important because that's the major primary site for glucose disposal. But in older people, you've got a couple other things going on. You've got increased abdominal adiposity, you've got insulin resistance building in the liver, and you've also got insulin resistance building in the adipocytes themselves. So tomorrow I'll address the role of exercise in really turning this multi-tissue insulin resistance in improving at one or all three of those sites. And the last thing I'll talk about tomorrow is the newest areas of research in exercise and aging, and that is the timing and the dosing of exercise. Similar to pharmacological studies, we're now experimenting with a large bolus of exercise versus smaller segments or intermittent smaller bouts that are the same volume as the large bolus but spread throughout the day and timed, perhaps after a meal when it's needed the most. And finally, this is the paradigm that we're all working toward. We can't reverse aging, everyone knows that, but an active lifestyle right? Starting very young will, improve functional capacity defined any way you want. In physiology, it's defined as VO2 peak many times. But our goal is to really raise the bar on the maximal functional capacity that a person is able to achieve in their early adulthood. And then our goal through middle age and early older age is to help people maintain that. Finally, in older age, it's much more difficult to reverse and improve things, but we know what we can do with an active lifestyle is to attenuate that slope of decline, right? And so what that means is it takes longer and longer for an older person to cross that disability threshold. And so what you're doing is compressing that period of morbidity closer and closer to the time of the natural lifespan. And so that's all of our goals, and tomorrow I'll be much more specific in addressing insulin sensitivity and glucose disposal. Thank you.
Perfect. So this is Ryan Watts. I'm so grateful to have Ryan here and delighted to introduce him. Ryan, in addition to being his own IT guy,
Right.
yeah, is a spectacular person. We're really grateful to have him here. An exceptional scientist. He completed his PhD at Stanford and immediately began as an assistant scientist at Genentech. Just 6 years later, he was named the head of neurodegeneration at Genentech, and he has remained a leader and innovator in his field, developing therapeutic approaches to Alzheimer's disease that are generalized to many other neurodegenerative disorders. He's, as I mentioned, just a great guy, a great friend. I'm really grateful for the time he has spent over the years to present here at BYU and to be a colleague in the science. He's a great example of a scientist who is devoted to his trade and also really well balanced. And he pays close attention to all the important things in his life. I do want to apologize to him. I know he loves to ski, and there's probably not a whole lot of great skiing going on right now, but he also loves to fish, and the weather is just right for spring fishing. So we hope that he'll take advantage of this visit with his family, and we want to welcome all of them as well to be here and listen to him. I'm sure is a great privilege. So we're grateful to have Ryan here, and I want to welcome him. Thanks.
I also like to play tennis. That was, and I was able to do that today with my brother, Darren. I have really one purpose today, and it's for those people sitting in the back row or the second row in, because I'm always that guy that sits in the back row, and that is that maybe you might be inspired to pursue a career in basically discovering therapies for neurodegenerative diseases. It's something I've been doing now for a little while, and it is so much fun, what I've been doing. And I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. I'm not going to talk about data in depth, and that's not the purpose of a short talk. Let me just open it up here. I also want to say it's so great to start a meeting with a prayer. I don't think I've ever been at a scientific meeting where that's happened, and so I really appreciate being invited to BYU and being able to share my story. All right, so neurodegeneration, the aging brain. This MRI image happens to be of Webby Adams, or Webster Adams, who you're going to learn about at the end of my talk. Happens to be my wife's grandpa, who died of Alzheimer's disease about 5 years ago. He was diagnosed with early Alzheimer's disease when I first started working on developing therapies for Alzheimer's disease, and we lived through the disease with him for about 5 years. He would call us and ask, "Do you guys live in California?" and 2 minutes later he'd ask, "Do you guys live in California?" And we'd get the same question about 5 times, and we knew at that time that his brain was starting to degenerate. And it just happened to be when my lab switched over from working on cancer to neurodegeneration, and I was trained at Stanford as a neuroscientist. Alzheimer's disease is a massive, massive unmet need, and we need BYU students to really dedicate themselves to understanding this disease and developing therapies, in addition to all the other brilliant people out there. We've made very little progress, except for really in human genetics, where Keone is one of the world leaders in this area in understanding some of the aspects of this disease. Parkinson's disease is the second largest disease. We think, these numbers are rough, but there are probably 5 to 10 million patients in the US with Alzheimer's, significantly more than cancer, yet it's really underfunded. And the biggest challenge that we've had and that I've experienced is that drug development in neurodegenerative diseases has just not been done the right way. There is a better way to do it. Here are a bunch of diseases and their associated acronyms, and they all share one thing in common, and that is underlying neurodegeneration, which basically means death of the nervous system. That death is initiated by a set of triggers. It can be accelerated by effectors, and one of the hot new fields around longevity and aging are potential pro-survival factors. In fact, there's a really interesting study out of Stanford, a parabiosis study, where an old mouse is fused to a young mouse, and young blood is basically circulated through the old mouse, and you can see some reversal of aging in the nervous system. There have been major advances in neurodegenerative diseases in the last 10 years, and that's why I'm confident that this is the right field to be in now. And in particular, human genetics. I'm just showing you an example here of a number of genes and pathways that have been identified in Alzheimer's disease. I will talk about these in more detail tomorrow. And also imaging or biomarkers, ways in which we can look at specific pathologies in the human brain. What has been studied for the last 20 years is the pathology of neurodegeneration. So basically the accumulation of proteins. And what has been shown more recently is that this pathology actually spreads throughout the nervous system in a stereotyped pattern from one part of the brain to another part of the brain. And this is something that we've been studying in some detail. But the end result is that the nervous system dies, and the question is, how does it die, and how can we stop that? So what I'm showing you here is actually a cell culture of neurons. We can do this with human neurons now, using inducible pluripotent stem cells. What we did here was with mouse neurons, and we've grown them for 24 hours, and then we remove the growth factor that supports their survival. And this type of physiology happens in aging, and what you can see is a stereotyped cell death. And we can go in and dissect the molecular mechanisms of this cell death. And I'm just showing you one example here. This is a paper that we published several years ago about some of the signaling pathways that regulate neuronal degeneration. Again, I promise not too much data. What is fascinating about these neurodegenerative diseases is that they affect different parts of the brain. So Alzheimer's disease will affect the hippocampus, which is initially required for short-term, the entorhinal cortex and the hippocampus, short-term learning and memory, and that's why Grandpa Webby would keep asking me, do we live in California? And yet he remembered some childhood event. Eventually, Alzheimer's disease spreads throughout the nervous system. Parkinson's disease affects the substantia nigra, which is sort of movement disorders, and so on and so forth. In fact, we have no idea why these diseases all affect different parts of the brain. Focusing a little bit on Alzheimer's disease, which was first described in 1906, happens to be the same year that the neuron doctrine received the Nobel Prize, and the neuron is the basic cellular unit. I showed you images of neurons degenerating. So we've known about Alzheimer's disease for 100 years, but really it's been the last 20 years and even 10 years that the mechanism of what's driving this disease we're starting to understand, but we can't stop it yet. We got to figure out some way to stop it therapeutically or through exercise. Luckily I started exercising about 4 years ago after gaining 40 pounds of free food at Genentech. It was about time. I was aging rapidly. But when Alzheimer's first looked at the famous case study, he saw what are called senile plaques. And it's basically, again, took 80 years to understand what those plaques are made of and how they eventually lead to degeneration of the nervous system. And this is showing you a healthy nervous system compared to an end-stage Alzheimer's patient. And you can see massive loss of tissue. And these plaques are made up of this small peptide, and this was shown through genetics and biochemistry. And both Keone's lab here at BYU, my lab, many labs have worked on what is sort of causing the accumulation of these peptides. And these peptides originate from a larger protein that's cleaved by a secretase, first by beta secretase, then by gamma secretase. So many drugs have been designed that target either the plaque or the peptide itself. The secretases, none of them have succeeded yet. I think part of it is the clinical trials are very poorly designed. And that's where we need better endpoints in how to measure cognition and aging. Interestingly, Down syndrome patients all develop Alzheimer's pathology by age 40, and there's a triplication of chromosome 21 where APP is expressed, and so they develop plaque at a very young age. And we recently discovered a protective mutation in APP that blocks or reduces its cleavage. We found it in Iceland in collaboration, and I'll talk a lot about that tomorrow and some of the follow-up work. I want to simplify this. I'm a simple Utah boy, and by the way, it's so good to be home. It's like cellular garbage. These peptides accumulate over years and years, and 1 out of 3 individuals will eventually develop Alzheimer's disease by the age 80. And this cellular garbage just accumulates, and either we produce too much, which is actually very rare, or we have an inability to clear the garbage as it's being produced. And so one of the ways that we've attacked this is by either clearing the existing garbage with antibodies to A beta or blocking its production. I call this the Utah approach and the California approach. You probably know why. So just focusing on clearing existing garbage, we decided to do something very unusual. We decided to treat individuals that have a mutation in a gene that causes Alzheimer's disease at age 40. And this particular family is from Colombia. And I encourage you to go and type in the New York Times and search Colombia, and you'll see in a very compelling movie of how these individuals develop Alzheimer's disease at age 40. We are treating now 300 patients at age 32, 33, 34. In advance, they have no cognitive deficits, and we're trying to delay the onset of the disease in a very defined patient population. And this was highlighted in the San Francisco Chronicle with our former head of Genentech research and myself as we invented this drug. So I want to pause for a minute and just shift gears. I've never been able to do this and talk about really what motivates me. And I'll just share it this way.
Everything that you see here is the neuroscience department. So this is where all the action happens. My name is Ryan Watts. I work as a scientist in a biotech company. I run a department of 30 people, all focused on finding cures for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Lou Gehrig's disease. There was a meeting where I decided to buy McDonald's Happy Meals for everyone, so this came in a Happy Meal. I thought it was awesome. This is a plaque in an Alzheimer's brain in a mouse, and these mice actually develop learning and memory deficits. We live here in the San Francisco area, and my daughter Abby is 8 years old. Come here, honey. I love pushing her on the swing. What are some of the other things we do, honey?
Hula hooping.
I love to hula hoop with my family, although I'm not any good at it. You should see her hula hoop.
Today was the day that I put everything in perspective.
My son Tanner is 11 years old.
That was before.
Everything that a father aspires to is have a son who's incredible at ping pong, you know?
Today is the day.
And Jenny is the most fun-loving woman you'll find. My wife is an excellent cook. We have a great time together.
There's a nice dirty window going in this.
So we come up here to the Stanford campus, a couple times a month. want to go bike and skateboarding. There's nothing better than the feeling of the wind blowing through your hair as you longboard, especially when you're being pulled by a dog. I love life and I love going 100 miles per hour everywhere I go. I love science because of that, because every day we're looking at something new, looking at new discoveries. But ultimately it comes down to remembering, what is it that we're doing, what is our cause? And my wife's family has been ravaged with Alzheimer's disease. A couple of years ago, we were down, spending some time with Jimmy's grandpa, who had recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He looked at me with this empty look. He had lost who he was. I have the same fear that the same thing's going to happen to my wife and to their family. And I knew then that I had to work harder to find a way to find a treatment for this devastating disease. And part of what drives my passion is finding a way to help other people. And in many ways that comes from my belief in God and my belief in Jesus Christ, who is a perfect example of someone who was always trying to help and heal those around him. I believe God has a plan for us. And for me, that plan is to make discoveries that can help relieve human suffering.
Red dot on my head.
Maybe next time we should talk about like your boyfriends.
Come on, Dad.
Okay. My name is Ryan Watts. I'm a scientist, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a Mormon.
I actually really do believe that God has a plan for us, and as I stated there, I really know what I'm set out to do. I will add to that. It's been a very interesting experience being a Mormon and a scientist. I've had many colleagues of mine wonder why I can be so critical of their data and yet believe in God. And I've had many interesting conversations, and you can imagine in California also being very open about being Mormon. It's been really actually it's been amazing. And I'll just end with this. So I think that the key in life is to be dedicated to causes, and even if those causes are temporary, like relieving human suffering, it's really a temporary cause. In the end, we're all for immortality, right? But yet we can be engaged in helping one another. And I love this quote that I heard in one of the General Conference talks. Men will work hard for money, men will work harder for other men, but men will work hardest of all when they are dedicated to a cause. Duty is never worthily performed until it is performed by one who would gladly do more if only he could. And I can tell you that I work night and day to understand these diseases. And in fact, sometimes I work a little bit too hard. And Abby wrote me this letter, my daughter, who's now 11 years old, when she was like 7. I'd been on the computer for 16 hours. That's a picture of me right there. And she kept asking me to go build this balsa wood airplane with her. And eventually she just built it, and then she threw it at me, and it accidentally hit me in the eye while I was behind my, as you can tell, Mac laptop. And she wrote me this apology letter. It says, "I'm sorry for hitting you. I'm sorry that I hit you with the airplane in the eye." So there is a balance to how hard you should work. You shouldn't always be behind your computer. And I guess just the very last thing is, in the last month, I've actually left Genentech, and I've formed and building a company called Denali Therapeutics with a singular focus on neurodegenerative diseases. And so I'm really looking for young and incredible talent. And that's it. See you tomorrow. Anyway, I was told to put it back.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. Unless you can close it down. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Roy E. Christensen. Mr. Christensen is the chairman of the Enzyme Group and was the former CEO as well. This group, through its operating subsidiaries, provides skilled nursing care at 121 different locations. They also have assisted and independent living services at 32 operations, and these numbers may be off at this point because they're always growing, and as well as home health and hospice operations and urgent care, and even mobile x-ray and diagnostic companies. They're operating in many of the western states as far east as Iowa and clear to California, and of course both north and south. You're going to get to hear a bit from Roy about his work, but he's had many interesting opportunities over the years. He was a colleague of Ronald Reagan when he was the governor of California, and helped to make suggestions about health care at that point in time. Later served on an advisory task force for Medicare and Medicaid in the Nixon administration, and an additional 6 years as a member of a task force, or as an advisory task force for the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, where he was traveling back and forth to Washington, D.C. every week. He later, after the German reunification, was also called in as a consultant there to help with healthcare opportunities as they brought the East and West Germany together. I think you'll see in him a remarkable ability to see what's needed and then to find ways to provide services, applications to help people and to think about the whole individual. He and his wife Carol, who's also here, they have 11 children. And one of the things that I learned about him tonight, I didn't realize this, but for those that are in this community and have been around, you know that you probably saw the Sacred Gifts exhibit at the Museum of Art last year. And they were very instrumental in helping to negotiate the contracts that allowed those paintings to come here, and spent some time in Sweden and Denmark working on that beautiful exhibit that was here for an extended period of time. So I got to say thank you to him for that. And we're delighted to have him here to be our keynote speaker. Please join me in welcoming Roy E. Christensen.
Well, as I heard that said about grandfather asking the question, same question every couple of minutes, reminds me of the story of the guy who went to a memory course, and he came home and he just raved about the memory course. Said that's the most wonderful experience of his life, and that you all should go to it. I learned so much from it. And finally someone, tired of hearing it, asked him, well, what's the name of it? And he thought about it a little bit more, and I said, what's the name about it? What's the name of it? He said, what's the name of those flowers? They're on a long stem, and they have thorns. I said, Rose? He said, yeah. And he turned to his wife and he said, Rose, what was the name of that course? Well, memory is a problem, and not just to people with Alzheimer's, but you may find that in my presentation to you here tonight. I had the opportunity of having lunch with one of my grandsons who just got a call to the Madrid, Spain mission. And when we took him back to the dorm, I got out and I hugged him and I said, you're a wonderful young man. And he hugged me back and he said, you're a wonderful old man. Well, we're older than we ever thought we could possibly become. In fact, I joke now that I used to always believe I should respect my elders, but it's getting harder and harder for me to find any. Well, I want to give maybe a little different take on this subject for a minute. The study of aging, with both its positives and negatives, didn't really begin until about the 1940s. About the closest thing to it was begun in Sweden about the turn of the 20th century, and it was called the Swedish Twin Registry. And it monitored all twins born in Sweden and their progress through life based on genetics, where identical twins shared virtually all of their genes with each other, and fraternal twins, on average, about 50%, which is about the same amount of sharing as non-twin siblings. Both types of twin pairs in the twin registries almost always share similar prenatal and early childhood environments as well. And by determining what are called concordance rates for a disease or trait among identical and fraternal twin pairs, researchers can estimate whether contributing factors for that disease or trait are more likely to be hereditary, environmental, or some combination of these. That database contains approximately 85,000 people. So it was a valuable base where they hadn't even intended it to be. In 1958, Nathan Schock, a PhD, was the chief of Gerentology of the National Institute of Health, NIH, broke with scientific convention and determined to study normal aging. We talk a lot about diseases and aging. Well, he chose to go a different way. Not just the study of bodies donated after death and the effect aging had had on them, but he wanted living people participating in scientific studies, not entirely dissimilar to the Swedish studies of the previous 60 years of the Swedish Twin Registry. So gerontology is a study not just of geriatrics or diseases of the elderly, or even of the processes of aging, but it's also what it is not to feel old, whatever one's chronicle age. And someday people realize somewhat surprisingly that they haven't managed to escape aging. Gerontologists tell us 3 stages of old in our society. It's kind of interesting, and this has changed since I began, and I'll give you some insight into that in a few minutes. They call them the young old, the 65 to 74, the old, the 75 to 84, and the oldest old, 85 and over. All these stages have something in common, and each of them faces specific issues at the same time. Unlike early life, which is birth to 21, relatively little was ever really known about older age. As stated, gerontology is a science, the study of the biological, psychological, social aspects of aging didn't even begin until after World War II. Up until that time, any interest in age concentrated entirely on the means of prolonging youth. And you might even say that that is the same today, or reversing the effects of aging. What gerontology is still lacking is the awareness of the spiritual dimensions, of the only part of life that gives us the resources we need to make long-term evaluations on the nature and meaning of life itself. Death and age are not synonyms. Death can come at any time. age comes only to the truly blessed. The gift of years comes to many more than realize that these later years are a gift, not a burden. In the church, we believe the days of our probation are extended. Not everyone who lives them either understands them or welcomes them. E.M. Forster said, "We must be willing to let go of the life we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us." So the world needs to let go of both the fantasies of eternal youth and their fears of getting older, and to find the beauty of what it means to age well. I am reminded especially of this when President Gordon B. Hinckley was interviewed by Mike Wallace for CBS 60 Minutes. He completely disarmed this media giant. Mike Wallace said, "Some people think of the church as a gerontocracy. This is a church run by old men," Wallace said. To which President Hinckley replied, "Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful that we will always have as the ones leading the church someone with so much experience and sensitivity?" Perhaps the most important dimension of aging well lies in the awareness that there is a purpose to aging. I love this. The French moralist Joubert wrote, "The evening of a well-spent life brings its lamps with it." The evening of a well-spent life brings its lamps with it. Old age enlightens, not simply ourselves, but those around us as well. Our task is to realize that. And the question is, why? Joan Chittister, in her book, The Gift of Years, asked, "Who of us hasn't heard it said over and over that we only have one life to live?" Life, according to her, the phrase intimates, is to be one unending, unerring line. What we did yesterday, what we do today cannot be undone. And the lifelong implications of this kind of thinking can be deadly. They set the future in cement. They freeze our successes or failures in eternal measures. They short-circuit tomorrow in ways we can never repair. After all, she concludes, if every act determines the next one, there is no newness, no change, or we would say in the church, no repentance. Well, on the other hand, let me move from the philosophies and the qualities of aging. I don't think enough is said about that. We live in a day where we're talking about asset resource management. We're talking about committees that determine how healthcare dollars are going to be spent. Where is the aged in these calculations? These are concerns that we have. And we have to have a greater value, a greater sense of the purpose of aging, that there is quality in it. But let me move from that to a review of the way geriatric care has been delivered historically. I have a little bit of a background in that, the way it's delivered today and the needs of geriatric care in the near-term future. In the 1800s and the first half of the 20th century, believe it or not, were dominated by almshouses. In 1923, 67% of the national almshouse population was composed of elderly individuals. By the 1950s, most of those had disappeared because of efforts of the government, removal of support, and so forth. And it was in 1962 when I entered the scene. As a CPA, doing the accounting for a few rest homes they were called then. And I saw so many people being cared for in large, older homes that were converted to older, multiple bedrooms. Nurses' aides were licensed for up to 8 people, and houses, therefore, were licensed for 8, 16, or 24 people, and a registered nurse wasn't even required. This was the condition of nursing homes in the late 50s, even the early 60s. Sometimes people referred to these as cesspools for the dying aged. That's how recent this is. It was a pitiful scene. I saw a situation where much more professional care could be given, larger facilities with more amenities, such as rehabilitation, not one-way streets into the facility and to the cemetery therefrom, but that actual rehabilitation could take place. And through all of the amenities that were necessary, and I'm going to address some of this in a few minutes, better food preparation, and that, believe it or not, is extremely important, and better management and economies of scale. In 1965, they passed the Medicare and Medicaid laws, and that provided a lot of additional impetus to the growth of the nursing home industry, which, while it had been increasing steadily since the passage of Social Security, it all of a sudden grew dramatically. And between 1960 and 1976, the number of nursing homes grew by 140%. Nursing home beds increased by 302%. The revenues received by the industry rose by 2,000%. And to a great extent, this growth was stimulated by private industry. I mentioned, and it was mentioned in introducing me, that I was very close to Ronald Reagan at this time, who was the governor of California. I spent a lot of time in his office, just the two of us, telling him where we had come from and where we needed to go. There were and are a lot of impediments to the improvement and the movement forward in the kind of facilities that are necessary to do what we're talking about here tonight. It's wonderful to talk about the programs, it's wonderful to talk about the things we can do, but there has to be a corresponding political and general support and belief in the structure, or it doesn't happen. And I sat for hours with Ronald Reagan, and he would take copious notes on the things I said. He would call in a senator after a couple of hours, and he'd say, Roy thinks we should do this, what do you think? And they'd say, well, I agree. And he says, who's going to object to it? And he said the unions, and he talked about some of the other battles that take place. And that was the case with each item on the list. And as has been said, when the Medicare, Medicaid laws were passed, I spent the next 7 years flying every week to Washington. And all of a sudden there was a new awareness of what all of this meant. The government was now in it on a whole scale. In the midst of all of that, I became involved in every state. I became involved in foreign countries, in Great Britain, in Israel, in France, in Denmark, in Canada. And we began to take a look at what the developing systems were around the world. One little hitch that occurred is one day there was an article that came out in the Sacramento Bee that Nancy Reagan was a major shareholder of my company. And that was the reason the governor had closed all of the mental facilities. By the way, a lot of these people were in mental hospitals where 60 and 80 beds in a room, But these were not mental patients, these were elderly people. Those were the conditions, honestly, back in the 60s and the 70s. Well, that caused the press to be on my doorstep for the next week, and this was the reason our company had become so prominent. And then they found out about 5 days later that she wasn't a major stockholder. Oh, and she wasn't even a stockholder at all. But the damage had been done, and it was a miserable time. And there are still people that believe those things are the things that caused us to go the way we did. Well, there was also a problem at that same time, and it has been a problem, where general hospitals contained about 40% of their population were long-term patients. They just didn't have a place to send them. And then in the 1980s, we passed a law called diagnostic-related groups, where the government would only pay for a diagnosis. They wouldn't pay for the number of days you were in a facility, only the diagnosis. They developed statistics nationwide that an appendix removal or whatever the diagnosis was only required so long. That's what they'd pay. So all of a sudden, hospitals had to move patients out due to the fact that no more reimbursement would be there. And these are the kinds of things we have gone through in the United States, and we're still in the middle of it. The era we are now in, with the wave of aging baby boomers, is going to reshape the healthcare system forever. The biggest changes, the ones I've told you, are not nearly what is just next week. The things that are happening now are monumental. There will be more people enjoying their later years, just as I said in the first part of this, but they'll be managing more chronic conditions and therefore utilizing more healthcare services. These statistics, and after seeing these other two presentations, I wish I had put these on so you could see them. By 2030, that's just 15 years from now, the over 65 population will nearly triple as a result of aging baby boomers. More than 6 out of every 10 boomers will be managing more than one chronic condition. More than 1 out of every 3 boomers, over 21 million, will be considered obese, with all the inherent problems that come with that. 1 out of every 4 boomers, 14 million, will be living with diabetes. We talked about that at our table. 8 times more knee replacements will be performed than today. These projections don't include the mental, such as dementia and the Alzheimer's that we have heard about here today. Well, meeting these future healthcare challenges will require many more resources. Things will have to change dramatically from where they are today. I have spent the last 53 years watching numbers and projections and where they have to go. And I'm telling you, this is one of the most dramatic moves I have seen. The boomers will leave their mark on American healthcare for generations to come. These 4 key factors drive how boomers will impact U.S. healthcare. There are significantly more of them, and as they age, they will require more healthcare services than any other generation of Americans. The prevalence of chronic disease is increasing among the boomers. They have different needs and expectations than the last generations. There are more medical services and technologies available to them than ever before. They make up a significant portion of the population, and as they age, the percentage of Americans over 65, those that utilize the bulk of healthcare services, will shift significantly. When the last of the boomers reach retirement age, almost 20% of the U.S. population will be 65 or over, compared to less than 13% today. So you've got this huge bulge going through. These aren't predictions of somehow something happening in the future. These are here, and they're pushing these numbers through. If you watch them in the past, those born between 46 and 64, that's called the baby boom, they drove many public services, particularly the schools, to add capacity that wasn't needed in the years following. They needed it while they were going through, but then there was a glut of school capacity that they didn't need. But for healthcare, the situation is different. While this population will create a notable rise in the demand of services, the demand will continue rather than drop off, because everyone, including the boomers and members of generations X and Y that follow, is living longer with more chronic disease. At the turn of the 20th century, just before the boomers' parents were born, life expectancy was 47. In 2002, which is the last year for which data is available, it was 77. So an additional 30 years. Get this, half of all the people who have ever lived to age 65 are alive today. They're going to change the demographic geography as well. The most preferred states for retirees, including boomers, are Florida, 14%, Arizona, 12%, North Carolina, 10%, California, 8%, Texas, 5%. By 2030, Georgia will climb into 5th place, bumping Illinois. And Nevada will jump from 29th to 16th. So here's what you're talking about here. This is going to cause a severe workforce shortage that is really going to challenge the healthcare system's ability to meet this demand. In 2005, there was a U.S. shortage of about 220,000 registered nurses. It is estimated that by 2020, I'd be interested in what your numbers that you have here, by 2020 that gap will be over 1 million. The nursing shortage is caused by both increased demand and by the aging of the nursing workforce. Nurses are boomers too. With fewer individuals entering the profession, or entering at an older age, the average age of the nursing workforce has increased every year. To meet future demand, it's estimated that the number of new nursing graduates would have to increase by 90% every year. More recent studies have indicated that the nursing shortage may be only half of what was originally projected or occur later than predicted due to nurses staying in the workforce longer. But under either scenario, under the most optimistic scenario, a huge shortage exists. Now in other areas, in addition to what you've heard here tonight, and I I love these two presentations. You really speak to me. It's a very, very important thing that you have committed to, and I applaud you for it. But there are and will continue to be serious needs for administrators, for social and psychological services directors, nurse directors, a huge shortage, very difficult, therapists of all kinds, physical, especially speech therapists, very difficult to find. Dietary specialists, not just cooks, but diet. The whole diet concept is becoming more and more scientific. Environmental engineers, housekeeping, plant, laundry, reimbursement specialists, the list goes on. The need for people in this industry is huge and not foreseeably to end. Well, I want to end this presentation by relating to a very simple story that has become a significant part of me personally, and leave with you a philosophy that I think is extremely important. It's a man that tells about having been a cab driver at one time in his life. And he says what he didn't realize was that it was also a ministry, because he drove the night shift. His cab was a moving confessional, and passengers climbed in and sat behind him in total anonymity and told him about their lives. He said he met people that whose lives amazed him and ennobled him and made him laugh and weep. But this is the story I want to tell you. He says, "None touched me more than a woman I picked up late one August night. I was responding to a call from a small brick fourplex in a quiet part of town. I assumed I was being sent to pick up some partiers, or someone who had just had a fight with a lover, or a worker heading to an early shift at some factory in the industrial part of town. When I arrived at 2:30 a.m., the building was dark except for a single light in a ground floor window." And he said under these circumstances, many drivers would just honk once or twice, wait a minute, then drive away. But I had seen too many poor people who depended on taxis as their only means of transportation. So unless the situation smelled of danger, I always went to the door. "This passenger might be someone who needs my assistance," I reasoned to myself. So I walked to the door and knocked. "Just a minute," answered a frail, elderly voice. I could hear something being dragged across the floor. After a long pause, the door opened. A small woman in her 80s stood before me. She was wearing a print dress, a pillbox hat with a veil pinned on it, like something out of a 1940s movie. By her side was a small nylon suitcase. The apartment looked like no one had lived in it for years. All the furniture was covered with sheets. There were no clocks on the walls, no knickknacks or utensils on the counters. In the corner was a cardboard box filled with photos and glassware. "Would you carry my bag out to the car?" she asked. I took the suitcase to the cab, then returned to assist her. She took my arm, and we walked slowly toward the curb. She kept thanking me for my kindness. "It's nothing," I told her. "I just try to treat my passengers the way I would want my mother treated." "Oh, you're such a good boy," she said. When we got in the cab, she gave me an address, then asked, "Could you drive me through the downtown?" "It's not the shortest way," I answered quickly. "Oh, I don't mind," she said. I'm in no hurry. You see, I'm on my way to a hospice." I looked in the rearview mirror and her eyes were glistening. "I don't have any family left," she continued. "The doctor says I don't have very long." I quietly reached over and shut off the meter. "What route would you like me to take?" For the next 2 hours we drove through the city. She showed me the building where she had once worked as an elevator operator. We drove through the neighborhood where she and her husband had lived when they were newlyweds. She had me pull up in front of a furniture warehouse that had once been a ballroom where she had gone dancing as a girl. Sometimes she'd ask me to slow in front of a particular building or corner and would sit staring in the darkness and saying nothing. But as the first hint of the sun creased the horizon, she suddenly said, "I'm tired, let's go now." We drove in silence to the address she had given me. It was a low building like a small nursing home with a driveway that passed under a portico. 2 orderlies came out to the cab as soon as we pulled up. They were solicitous and intent, watching her every move. They must have been expecting her. I opened the trunk and took the small suitcase to the door. The woman was already seated in a wheelchair. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, reaching into her purse. "Nothing," I said. "Or you have to make a living," she answered. "There are other passengers," I responded. Almost without thinking, I bent and gave her a hug, and she held on to me tightly. "You gave an old woman a little amount of joy," she said. "Thank you." I squeezed her hand, then walked into the dim morning light, and behind me a door shut. It was the sound of the closing of a life. Now, I tell you this story for just this brief summation that he gives of that experience. He said, "I didn't pick up any more passengers that shift. I drove aimlessly, lost in thought. For the rest of that day, I could hardly talk. What if that woman had gotten an angry driver or one who was impatient to end his shift? What if I had refused to take the run or had honked once, then driven away?" His conclusion: "On a quick review, I don't think I have done anything more important in my life." We're conditioned to think that our lives revolve around great moments, but great moments often catch us unaware, beautifully wrapped in what others may consider a small one. I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa. She said, "Our life of poverty is as necessary as the work itself. Only in heaven will we see how much we owe to the poor for helping us to love God better because of them." I love that. How much we owe to the poor for helping us to love God because of them. Well, I paraphrase that. Our life of aging and working with the aging is as necessary as the work itself. Only in heaven will we see how much we owe to the aged for helping us to love God because of them. I just want to leave you with this one thought, that I had no intent of doing what I've done for a lifetime. I have no intent for making money. Money has never been my object. But the opportunities that have come to me and the lives, when I began to talk to the people in our facility, and I saw just what this cab driver saw in this woman, from her dancing days to her elevator operating days. I had a patient once in a facility early on that he was a major factory owner in Poland. I mean, he was just a quiet man that nobody knew in the facility. I used to just go and beg to have 10, 15 minutes to talk to him, to learn from his life. We live both with the quality and the need for helping in that quality of life. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity. Plead with you to look for it as well. Thank you.
I believe you have heard tonight the wide spectrum of gerontology and why so many of us are so committed to studying and understanding the aged. And as has been expressed, the great worth in the work that we are doing in helping these people, our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents, successfully age. I just really appreciate all the presentations that have been given tonight. I would like, well, normally at BYU, we have this tradition of making a small token of appreciation. And at BYU, well, I'd like to ask the three presenters to please come up here, and then I'll explain this. We want to make sure you go away with a lot of friends. We're going to give each one tonight a small package of appreciation, a token of appreciation. BYU fudge is given everywhere. So each one of you, I guarantee, will have many friends tonight with this. But I also know, Loretta, that you were coming, and the message we tried to give someone is that to successfully age, you need to exercise. So we have for each of you a water bottle you can exercise with and a Y on it to remember this night by. And I just really appreciate all three of you for coming and doing this. So enjoy your friends, enjoy your exercise, and we're very thankful for what you've done. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, thanks a lot. Okay. We've just begun. Tomorrow we'll have two research presentations. Both will be at 11 o'clock, so you have a hard choice to make on these two research presentations, where Loretta and Ryan will go in more detail about the particular exercise and particularly on Alzheimer's disease. One will be in B190 JFSB, a large auditorium in the Joseph Smith building, the Joseph Fielding Smith building, and the other one will be in 250 Swicket, the Kimball Tower, at 11 o'clock. So I invite you to attend one of those lectures. In the hallway, as you look over here to this side, you'll see we have posters from the research projects that have been supported by the Gerentology program. I invite you to stop and talk with the the researchers and some of their students who will be at these posters and willing to talk to you this evening. You'll also note there's refreshments in the hallway that are there as well. I really appreciate you coming tonight. We have been blessed with some wonderful presentations. I look forward to the presentations tomorrow. In closing, Gina Bowles, one of our Gerentology scholarship recipients, will provide the benediction, and I hope you've enjoyed this evening. Thank you. We'll do a substitution here.
Our dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity that we have had to gather and to learn more about aging and about gerontology. We're grateful for the preparation that went into these presentations and for each presenter who was able to visit BYU and share their expertise with us. We are grateful for those who have supported the gerontology program and pray that we can continue to bless the lives of those around us who are aging and who have blessed our lives in return. Please bless the refreshments that they can nourish us and that we can enjoy our company tonight. We love thee and say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.